At 1447 local, a Ukrainian MiG-29 had been inside Russian-controlled airspace for 90 seconds, carrying a pair of French AASM guided bombs toward a border guard post Moscow believed untouchable. In a span of 12 minutes, that single sortie would either sever a crucial resupply artery feeding Russian forward positions in Ukraine, or the jet would limp back to base, while ground units kept receiving ammunition from the same checkpoint. Then, in 6 seconds, everything unraveled. The pilot skimmed the treetops, hugging terrain to remain below Russian radar horizons. His GPS was being jammed, fuel readings sliding towards zero, and navigation relied on a paper map taped to his knee. If nothing failed, he would have one solitary opportunity to strike. Then a bird hit the intake. At a closure speed of 180 km/h, a crow struck the left engine intake. Compressor blades spinning at roughly 13,000 RPM shredded in an instant. The engine emitted a grinding scream, the unmistakable sound of a compressor stall. The MiG yawed left and started dropping toward the forest. The pilot reacted on instinct. Right rudder to counter asymmetric thrust. Left hand pulling back on the stick to arrest the drop. Right hand slamming the engine restart. Altitude fell from 200 meter to 180, then 160. Branches flashed by close enough to count. The restart routine required 30 seconds. He had maybe 10 before impact, and all of this played out at the worst possible moment. The Podlet K-1 short-range, mobile, low-altitude radar, designed to detect and track aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles down to 100 miles at Klimovo had been logging intermittent contacts for the prior 2 minutes. Small blips popping over ridgelines, then vanishing into valleys. The operator reached for the radio, then the contact winked out behind a hill just as a lock was forming. 6 seconds. That was all the lock lasted. 2 more seconds, and he would have had a fire control solution. The operator hesitated. He could log the contact and spend the next hour filing reports, or he could let the next shift handle what was probably another flock of cranes. He chose coffee. Back in the cockpit, the MiG's left engine coughed back to life at about 140 meter altitude. The pilot felt asymmetric thrust vanish as both turbines came back in sync, but the engine ran rough. Compressor efficiency collapsed to roughly 30%, and worse, the near crash had burned precious fuel. The arithmetic was merciless. 12 minutes of reserve had shrunk to 3. Then power lines appeared, transmission cables not on his tactical map, hanging like a wire wall 60 meters above the valley floor. At 650 km/h, he had 2 seconds to react. He pulled 5G instantaneously to stay conscious. The MiG kicked upward, clearing the top wire by under 10 meters. The electromagnetic field from the lines made his instruments jitter. Behind him, the Podlet K-1 operator was walking to the break room, leaving his replacement puzzling over the odd radar return logged 6 minutes earlier. The MiG pushed on with 1 damaged engine and critical fuel, the pilot's hands trembling from the close calls. The navigation checkpoint showed up exactly where the paper map promised, a distinctive bend in the Desna River 10 kilometers from the release point. With a single engine coughing and fuel sufficient for only 1 pass, the pilot prepared for an attack many strategists would label suicidal, a vertical climb through 8,000 feet of hostile airspace. At 1441 he reached the initial point for his run. 50 kilometers to target, flying at 200 miles, effectively invisible to radars beyond the horizon. In 45 seconds, everything would flip. He shoved the throttles forward and pulled the stick back. The G's hit him instantly. 6 times the force of gravity slammed him into his seat. His G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs and abdomen, but it wasn't enough. At 3,000 meters, his peripheral vision grayed. At 5,000 meters vision tunneled. By 6,500 AASM he nearly blacked out, his hand frozen on the stick by muscle memory. The MiG-29's nose pointed almost straight up, both engines screaming at full power. The damaged left engine vibrated violently, threatening to shear itself off, but he could not throttle back. He needed every meter of altitude. On his radar warning receiver, new threats were appearing every second. He had just announced himself to every air defense system within a 200-kilometer radius. Then the weapons interface failed. The French AASM bombs were wired to the Soviet-era MiG through a jury-rigged interface Ukrainian technicians cobbled together in a Kyiv warehouse. It worked perfectly on the ground, but at 6G and $7,000 MERS the voltage regulator failed. The weapons panel flashed a French-language connection error. The bombs didn't receive the release cue scheduled in 20 seconds. The pilot's oxygen-thinned brain fought the emergency checklist. Left hand holding the climb, right hand frantically toggling switches on the armament panel, manual override, switch to backup power, cycle master arm, nothing. The first bomb remained inert. That's when the Su-35 engaged. 72 kilometers away, a Russian Su-35 had been vectored toward an anomaly when the MiG suddenly bloomed on radar, climbing like a rocket. The Su-35 pilot locked target and fired an R-37M hypersonic missile. At roughly Mach 6, it would close the distance in about 36 seconds. The Ukrainian pilot's receiver screamed, "Missile launch bearing 045, closing at 2 kilometers." He could not evade yet. He still had to get the weapons off. His left hand steadied the aircraft while the right found the emergency release switches. Individual pickle buttons for each pylon, bypassing the digital link. At $8,000 M, the release point, it was now or never. He slammed the first pickle button, nothing. He held it down, 1, 2, 3. At the third second, the first bomb finally ejected. Its motor ignited after a nauseating delay. The second bomb's separation was quicker as the manual system warmed up. Both AASMs peeled away and instantly pitched upward, their rockets pushing them higher. Now, he could evade. The pilot rolled inverted and performed a high G split S, trading altitude for high speed as he dove earthward. His vision went black for 2 seconds. When sight returned, he was descending through 4,000 meters. The R-37M was still tracking. He needed chaff, jamming, anything. His jet wouldn't outrun that missile. The chaff dispenser spat 3 bundles and the ECM pod began jamming, but it had been overheated by the climb and hit thermal limit, shutting down automatically. The missile closed to 10 kilometers. He had one remaining option, the notch. He turned perpendicular to the missile's trajectory, putting it on his 3 o'clock. Relative motion shrank to near zero. The seeker, set to filter out stationary clutter, lost the lock. The R-37M passed 100 meters behind the MiG. Its proximity fuse didn't trigger. Fragments from the missile's self-destruct peppered the fighter's tail, punching small holes in the rudder. The pilot didn't care. He dove for the tree line, altimeter unwinding as he sought the low cover. Above the battlefield, 2 French AASM bombs were climbing toward their apex. One motor was already sputtering. The 2 munitions reached apogee around $8,500 meters. Their motors burned out, and they began the long descent toward the border post at Bela Berioska. 4 minutes of fall through empty sky, inertial guidance struggling without satellites, terminal seekers dark. Everything needed to go right. Combat rarely obliges. The first bomb's motor had ingested contaminated fuel. Water vapor condensed in a Ukrainian fueling truck, frozen at altitude, then flashed to steam in the combustion chamber. The motor produced 60% thrust for 20% less time than designed. The bomb's onboard processor, a compact French computer the size of a wallet, ran the trajectory math. Current path would land 2 kilometers short of the intended aim point, assuming nothing else intervened. Then, the Kursuka 4 EW vehicle near Bryan's transmitted maximum power jamming, dumping 1,000 watts of precise noise across the GPS band. Signals from satellites 20,000 kilometers overhead, broadcasting at mere hundredths of a watt, vanished. Both bombs lost satellite guidance together and defaulted to inertial navigation. Their mechanical gyros spun in isolation, accumulating roughly 2 meters of error per second. By the time they reached Bela Berioska, they would be about 480 meters off. For unguided weapons, that would be a failure. The bombs switched to their backups. INS through rough navigation, then infrared terminal seekers. But the sun intervened. At 1449, the sun sat directly along the seeker's line of sight. At 3,000 hours, the second bomb's IR sensor activated and locked onto the sun. Optical filters saturated. The computer registered a 5,678 Kelvin heat source and immediately broke lock. It searched again and found nothing but blinding white. For 15 seconds, the bomb flew blind. 4 kilometers of descent without terminal guidance as INS error accumulated and the trajectory degraded. The processor cycled through image processing algorithms, edge detection, contrast enhancement, spectral analysis, but nothing overcame the solar glare. Meanwhile, the first bomb hit a wind shear at $5,000 men. The jet stream edge, an 80-knot lateral flow, grabbed the bomb's fins like a sail. The weapon yawed 20 degrees in under a second. Its simple analog gyros tumbled. The bomb started slowly spinning. At 2 revolutions per minute and dropping at 280 NAS, its tiny processor had to solve differential equations in real time, commanding fin deflections to arrest spin without making matters worse. Then an S-400 battery at Clovo detected 2 small falling contacts. Their radar cross-section measured about 0.2 meter. The operator hesitated, too small for aircraft, too fast for helicopters, wrong trajectory for ballistic warheads. But orders were strict. When unsure, engage. 2 48N6 missiles launched, accelerating toward the falling objects. It was a poor match. The missiles were designed for aircraft with sustained, predictable flight. The bombs were in near ballistic fall, their trajectories set by gravity and drag. The S-400's fire control couldn't compute a viable intercept. The missiles streaked past harmlessly, seekers locking on empty sky. Salvation for the first bomb came at 2,000 meters altitude. Its spin had carried it east away from the sun, letting its IR seeker finally acquire heat sources. 3 BTR-82A armored personnel carriers parked in formation, engines hot, provided strong infrared signatures. Lock achieved. The second bomb, still fighting the solar glare, ignored heat and searched for contrast. A roof's geometric outline gave it a pattern match. A backup mode French programmers added after lessons learned in Mali, where targets often matched surrounding temperature. Pattern lock established. At 2 kilometers altitude, both seekers finally had locks. But the Russians had another layer of defense. The Pantsir S-1 protecting the border post, a modern point defense system engineered to defeat precision-guided munitions. Its radar can track projectiles. Its missiles can intercept shells. Its guns create lethal walls of lead. Yet the attack profile confounded the system. The bombs were coming nearly vertically. At 8 seconds to impact, the Pantsir's radar locked on. The operator had never trained on an approach like this. Scenarios usually involved cruise missiles, helicopters popping over ridges, or aircraft strafing in. These contacts were at 87 degrees elevation, nearly vertical, falling at 312 ms. The fire control computer spat out an impossible result. Targets outside engagement envelope. The bombs were at 900-meter altitude. Pantsir's 57E6 missiles had a minimum engagement range of 1-200 meters and required 1.5 seconds post-launch for proximity fuses to arm. Impact was estimated in 2.9 seconds. The math did not work. He fired anyway. 4 missiles erupted from the Pantsir in a 2-second salvo, motors screaming them upward toward the bombs. Physics remained unforgiving. The seekers could not lock on targets inside their minimum engagement band, while the motors were still burning. At 400 meters altitude, 1.5 seconds after launch, the proximity fuses armed, but the bombs were already below them. The missiles self-destructed, their fragments raining down like steel shrapnel across the compound. The operator reacted. When missiles fail, use the guns. The twin 2A38M autocannons swiveled up, each barrel capable of 2,500 rounds per minute, firing 30mm tungsten cord shells meant to shred aircraft. He held the trigger. The cannons barked, creating a cone of shells above the compound. But their elevation limit was 85 degrees. The bombs came in at 87 degrees, just outside the gun's envelope. Thousands of rounds passed mere meters behind the bombs. A razor-thin angle separated interception from failure. The first bomb's damaged seeker tried to hold on to the BTR exhaust plumes, but gyroscope error offset it by 12 meters. At 50 meters altitude, it made last corrections. At 1451 impact, the 340-kilo weapon punched through a roof at 312 ms. Kinetic energy alone collapsed the structure. Then, the shaped charge detonated. 50 kilograms of high explosive produced a copper jet, scorching at roughly 8 kilometers. The asymmetric strike sent the jet sideways through the building instead of straight down, amplifying structural damage. Load-bearing walls on the north side were sheared. The building toppled like a felled tree rather than collapsing uniformly. 17 seconds later, the second bomb arrived. Its damaged fin had induced a corkscrew approach. It spiraled through the last 200 malers and struck the corner of the vehicle compound, 8 meters off the intended aim point. But 227 kilos of metal and explosive, impacting at 312 mass, needs little precision. The kinetic shock ruptured every fuel tank. The 3 BTR-82As didn't explode in classic fashion. They melted. 500 liters of diesel per vehicle aerosolized, mixing with air in near stoichiometric ratios. The shaped charge provided ignition. The ensuing fuel-air explosion reached temperatures around 4,000 degrees Celsius for about 1.3 seconds. Meanwhile, the MiG-29 turned west and slipped back across the frontier into Ukrainian airspace on one functioning engine. Tanks nearly dry, pilot half-conscious from extreme Gs. Behind him, the former border post burned. The mission was ugly, improvised, and only marginally tidy. But it worked. Real war is not a movie. The strike achieved its objective, and for the operators up and down the chain, that was what mattered. Goodbye for now.